everybody, it is time once again for another 2021-2022 season preview, and today we're going to be talking about a Western Conference team that I have talked about a lot this offseason. They have made some big moves, and that is the Chicago Blackhawks, a team that was not a playoff team last year. Had a lot going on this offseason. Obviously, the huge Seth Jones deal, the Marc-Andre Fleury trade, Jonathan Toews returning. There's a lot to get into here with Chicago, so we're going to get right into it. Before we begin, I just ask you to please hit that thumbs up and subscribe. It helps the channel so much and is greatly appreciated. But let's get into it, and we're starting here by looking at last year where Chicago went 24, 25, and 7, just under 500, 55 points, and finished 6th in the Central Division. Obviously, that was not good enough to make the playoffs, and they honestly had a good first half of the season. Chicago was a team that, around the midway part of the year, was looking like they could possibly make the playoffs, but then it really kind of fell apart at the end. The rails, or the train went off the tracks, so to say, in the latter part of the year, and Chicago ended up finishing down in 6th place. Not a playoff team last year. They scored 2.84 goals for per game, which is very, very average in the middle there. And their defense wasn't all that great. They gave up 3.29 goals against per game. That obviously is way too high. And they went out this offseason and got a goaltender who was a Vezina Trophy winning goaltender last season, so they are definitely looking to improve upon that goals against number for sure this season. Power play wasn't bad, actually, 21.7% on the power play. That is pretty darn good. However, their penalty kill was not very good at 76.8%. Not terrible, not the worst in the league, but definitely not anything that they're going to be, looking at as being a big win from last year. They definitely want to get that penalty kill better, much closer or above 80%. So that was last year, and then we went into the offseason, and Chicago has never been a team that shied away from making big moves. Well, they certainly didn't shy away from any big moves this offseason. Look at their additions and subtractions here. There was a lot going on. Starting on the subtraction side of things, Duncan Keith was traded to the Edmonton Oilers, so longtime defenseman and 3-time Stanley Cup winner Duncan Keith no longer there. Brent Seabrook, now Brent Seabrook wasn't playing. He's never going to play in the NHL again because of injury, but his contract was sent to the Tampa Bay Lightning in exchange for Tyler Johnson, who we'll get to. Adam Boqvist was traded to Columbus in the Seth Jones deal. So that is two defensemen actually played from last year. Keith and Boqvist now gone off the roster. Pius Suter was not tendered a qualifying offer, and he ended up being a unrestricted free agent that signed with Detroit. And honestly, that was one of the more baffling moves for me for Chicago this offseason, is because Suter played really, really well last year. Put up great numbers, seemed to fit in the lineup really well. He had a great year, and they just let him go. That was a little baffling to me, but he will not be back. David Kampf is gone. He's signed with Toronto, 4th-line guy. Nikita Zadorov was traded to the Calgary Flames, so there's another defenseman gone for Chicago. And forward Vinny Hinostroza left as a free agent as well. Moving over to the addition side of things, obviously the big one is Seth Jones, who they traded that massive package for to Columbus and to bring Seth Jones in, and then proceeded to give him a huge contract extension, paying him $9.5 million per season. I've talked a lot about that. I'm not going to get into it. I think I've made my feelings about the Seth Jones situation very well known. I'm not a fan, but he's there. He's going to be their number one defenseman. We'll see how it goes. He's going to play a huge role, and he's got to live up to that role in Chicago, or else that is going to go south very fast. They also brought in goaltender Marc-Andre Fleury from the Vegas Golden Knights for literally nothing. They traded away an ECHL player for Fleury, and then he already had his contract terminated by Vegas, and they literally got Marc-Andre Fleury, the reigning Vezina Trophy winner, for free from the Vegas Golden Knights. So huge upgrading goal there for Chicago, and we'll see what kind of effect that has on them this season. But I would definitely expect that goals against per game number to be lower this year based on what they've done this offseason. Underrated move is defenseman Jake McCabe. I like Jake McCabe a lot. So he's been buried in Buffalo his entire career. He didn't play much last season because of injury, but on a new team, on a better team than the Buffalo Sabres, I think we're really going to see that Jake McCabe is a really solid middle pair defenseman, and I think that's what he's going to be for Chicago this year. So I really like that signing. They brought in Tyler Johnson from the Tampa Bay Lightning. They traded Brent Seabrook's contract to Tampa Bay, and they got Tyler Johnson out of the deal, and obviously veteran forward who was kind of pushed down the depth chart in Tampa because of the just loads of talent that Tampa Bay had or has. But Johnson, they needed the cap relief. Johnson making $5 million per year. He's definitely going to play a bigger role in Chicago than he did in Tampa over the last couple years. And it's going to be interesting to see what kind of numbers he can put up playing more minutes. Defenseman Caleb Jones came in from Edmonton after the part of the Duncan Keith trade. He obviously, Seth Jones' brother, was one of the enticing pieces that made Seth Jones want to sign long-term in Chicago. So the Jones brothers are together. And forward Jujhar Khaira was brought in free agency, also from the Edmonton Oilers. He's a fourth-line guy, maybe the extra forward this year. Very, very much a depth piece there who brings some grit into the lineup, but he's kind of a David Kampf replacement, but I don't even think he's an exact one-for-one replacement for David Kampf. I think he might end up being the extra forward just on the roster and healthy scratched a lot this year. But those are the additions and subtractions for the Chicago Blackhawks this offseason. Hopefully I didn't forget anything important. Now it's time to take a look at my projected roster. So here is what I am projecting the Chicago Blackhawks roster to look like at the beginning of the year. And I will say this right now, there are some roster spots up for grabs. So this could change. Up front, Patrick Kane, Jonathan Toews, his return. It's going to be really interesting to see what he looks like after a year away from hockey, dealing with that illness all last year. Hopefully he's healthy and able to play. And it's going to be interesting to see, he hasn't played in over a year. Is he going to be rusty? Is he going to be the same Jonathan Toews? There's a lot of questions there with him. Alex DeBrincat, Tyler Johnson, Kirby Dach, Dominic Kubalik, Dylan Strome, Ryan Carpenter, Brandon Hagel, Philip Kurashev, Brett Connolly, Henrik Borgstrom, and Jujhar Khaira. Now, those bottom 3 or 4 guys, I do think that there's room for changes there, especially when we get to the depth. You could see some guys make the team in place of some of those guys, depending on how training camp and the preseason goes, but we'll get to that. Defensively, obviously, Seth Jones, Jake McCabe, Connor Murphy, and Calvin DeHaan are your top 4. Those are solidified guys that are absolutely going to be in this lineup. Then you've got Riley Stillman, who came over from Florida last year. Caleb Jones, brought in this offseason. Then you've got young guys, Ian Mitchell and Wyatt Kalynuk. They both played NHL games last year, but were kind of like on that line between AHL and NHL. And it's going to be interesting to see which one, who gets the playing time this year, and who's the healthy scratch, and who maybe gets sent down to the minors. What I will say, though, is I think it's very likely that Chicago carries 8 defensemen. That's why I have 8 D-men listed here. I think they're going to do 13 forwards, 8 defensemen, and 2 goaltenders for their 23-man roster, just because I don't think there's that much separating Kalynuk and Mitchell, and they both played a pretty similar number of games last year, and I think there's a good chance that they carry both of them on the NHL roster and they both get into games. In goal, obviously, newcomer Marc-Andre Fleury is your new starting goaltender in Chicago, and that is certainly a big upgrade. And Kevin Lankinen will be the backup. He kind of took over the starting job last year. Played pretty well at times. Again, faded a little bit down the stretch as the team faded down the stretch. But I still like Lankinen a lot, and I think he can at least be a really good backup. He may not be ready to be a starting goaltender, but when you have Marc-Andre Fleury there, you don't need him to be a starting goaltender. He's, I think, going to be a solid backup who can come in and play 1 out of every 3 or 4 games and give the team a chance to win. Now we get to the depth side of things, and this is where things get interesting because Chicago has, I think, a lot of guys that could take roster spots. And the first one is Alex Nylander. Now, Nylander missed all of last season with an injury, and that's why I have him on the depth part and not making the team. But he could absolutely come in and make the team, and he could take a spot from Brett Connolly. He could take a spot from Jujhar Khaira. He could take a spot from even Philip Kurashev. He definitely could make the team. My only question was, are they going to start him out in the AHL until he gets back, into the flow of playing hockey, a regular season schedule? Are they going to start him down in the minors, let him build some confidence, get his game back? Because he didn't play all of last season. So, there's definitely going to be some rust there. I think there's a chance they might start him in the AHL and then bring him up later in the year, but he very well could be on that regular 23-man roster out of camp, and if he is, I think a guy like Brett Connolly would likely to be waived. Adam Gaudette's another guy. He's kind of bounced around a little bit, hasn't really solidified a full NHL job anywhere. He definitely could, with a good training camp in preseason, be on the 23-man roster right out of the gate. And again, maybe like a Kurashev or a Borgstrom or a Khaira would end up not being on the roster, and with Gaudette taking their spot. But he's an interesting one that's kind of right on that line. Mackenzie Entwistle, he's a guy that I think is going to start in the minors, but as you have injuries throughout the year, he'll definitely be pretty high on the call-up list. And then one of the most interesting guys of all is Lukas Reichel. This is all going to come down to, is Reichel NHL ready? If he is NHL ready to play at least a middle six role, because you're not going to play a young scorer like that on the fourth line, that makes no sense. So if he's either NHL ready and good enough to play a middle six role on the wing for this team, then he could very easily make this team, and again, be taking a roster spot from somebody that I have listed, somebody like a Brett Connolly or a Jujhar Khaira or a Kurashev. Very, very easily. If he's not ready to play a full-time middle six role for the Blackhawks at the NHL level yet, though, I think you give him 1 more year. And that's going to be something that's determined during training camp and during the preseason. But if he makes the team out of camp, I think he's going to be playing a pretty significant role with the team and could definitely win that job. But if he's not ready to play at that level yet, then I think you give him another year of development, and then you try, obviously, next season to work him into the NHL lineup. But Reichel is going to definitely be an interesting guy to watch in the preseason. Defensively, obviously, I have them carrying 8 defensemen on the roster, so they're probably they're going to have multiple injuries before they start needing to call up defensemen and whatnot. But Nicholas Bowden is definitely a guy. He played NHL games last year. He's probably going to be the first defenseman to get called up if they do need a call up, and he has a little bit of experience. Another young guy. Think very likely he starts the year in the AHL, but as soon as somebody goes down, he's probably first on the list to move up to the NHL. And Jakub Galvis is a Czech defenseman who is still very young, but has shown some really good signs. And again, depth-wise, I think if you start having guys drop out of the main roster and you need to call somebody up, he's going to be probably right behind Bowden as far as call-ups go. And then the third goaltender, I would imagine, is going to be Malcolm Subban. I think he probably is one spot higher on the depth chart than Chris D'Elia. And obviously, he's not going to be one of the main 2 goaltenders this year like he was last year with Fleury and Lankinen in there, but he'll probably be the number 3, so if anything were to happen to Fleury or Lankinen, he would come in and be the new guy. So That's my projected roster for the Chicago Blackhawks this year. Again, this is a team where I think there's a lot of jobs up for grabs in camp here, especially with this forward group. Guys like Nylander, Gaudette, Reichel, Entwistle. Those are guys that are going to be trying to win jobs in training camp. And you have open spots with guys like Hagel and Kurashev and Connolly and Borgstrom and Kara. They're not locks for the roster necessarily. So there's going to be a lot of good preseason action with the Chicago team. And it's going to be interesting to see who makes it and who ends up getting waived or sent to the minors or whatnot to start the year. But that is your Chicago Blackhawks for 2021-2022, and boy, they are going to be a really interesting team this year. That's why they were part of my interesting team series, just because, all the changes, the big moves this offseason, and they're a team that I could see finishing in such a wide array of spots. Like, it wouldn't surprise me in the least if this team finished like 6th or 7th in the division. If Fleury shows age and drops off from where he was last year, if Seth Jones plays like he did last season, then the defense really isn't that much better. If they struggle to find depth scoring up front, obviously they've got some good scorers in their top 6, but if they struggle to find depth scoring up front, I could conceivably see this team in a pretty tough Central Division finishing 6th again. But at the same time, if they finish 2nd, I also really wouldn't be surprised. I'd be like, if Fleury's still a Vezina-level goaltender, if Seth Jones gets his career back on track, the defense really tightens up, Jake McCabe helps out, Connor Murphy has a career year. They've got some of the young guys up front really take that next step offensively. You could tell me that this team would finish 2nd in the division, and I wouldn't be surprised. I'd be like, yeah, they're capable of that. So this is a team that really has a wide range of possibilities this season. I think they could absolutely be a playoff team, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if they're not. And that's why they play the games, because it's really going to come down to, are they able to consistently get the level of play out of everybody that they're expecting, or do some guys struggle and that kind of sink their season? So Chicago is going to be a fun team to watch this year, and I'm usually not saying that. I'm not a guy that usually is big on the Blackhawks or watching the Blackhawks or really excited for their season or anything, but this year I'm really excited to watch the Blackhawks this year because I can't wait to see what this team is. Are they going to be that 2nd, 3rd place team that makes the playoffs, or are they going to be that 6th place team that misses? Or, they could be anywhere in between. It's going to be an interesting team to watch for sure. But that's my season preview for the Chicago Blackhawks. Like, comment, share, subscribe, follow on social media. All those links are down in the description. If you'd like to further support the channel, our memberships, merch store, and donation links are down in the description as well. Keep spreading the word about this channel. Let's keep this thing growing. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I'll talk to you guys soon.